The people mentioned in this video, no matter if they're MatPat or other theorists that disagree with him, are real people that did nothing wrong. Anything they say makes you angry, I invite you to go drink some water, turn off the video. Harassment over opinions is stupid. And if you do that, I strongly advise you that you go get a life. If this video offends you, deal with it, I guess. Before the video begins, if you, dear viewer, haven't watched the original video by MatPat by the game Theorists, you should find it at the top of the description as well as the pinned comment. Go show MatPat some genuine love and appreciation. God knows he needs it, and tell Jackie JK sent you. Dear MatPat, I hope this video finds you well. I know the title might seem like this is a hate video, sorry about that. You know controversy drives in clicks, and I feel that having this blow up is kind of the only way to get you or someone in Team Theorists to watch this. Also, I know this is a long video, and please bear with me because I feel that some of the things I say throughout the video up until the very end can help out game theory in the long run. But yeah, this isn't a hate video. So, no, this video is an attempt to explain exactly why you're mistaken in your most recent theory, and what you can do to mitigate some of that hate. Not only for the betterment of the video quality in game theory, but especially for the betterment of the community, its relationship with us theorists. So, anyone that is also watching that isn't MatPat, welcome. I've been a fan of game theory basically since I knew enough English to start watching YouTube back in 2016. And I was making my own theories privately before I found out about you, so believe me when I say that this video comes from the heart, and that I have no ill will towards you or anyone related to game theory. I genuinely love everything that game theory stands for. That goes for game theory, that goes for film theory, food theory, even style theory, which I was not expecting to like. In that sense, I'm going to go point by point in your video, explain my gripes with it, and hopefully generate some back and forth about it. Speaking of back and forth, you can reach me on Discord at JK0JK. If you want to discuss any of this privately to a greater extent than just what is said here. Alright, let's do it.
And let me tell you, have I got a theory for you. It is a theory that you are absolutely guaranteed to hate.
Now, this opening. I know you can see it through my VTuber avatar, but I am holding my arms high. Anyway. This opening, you do not need me to tell you that this opening in particular is absolutely genius. But my problem with it is what it is referencing. In your theory since Gregbot, you tend to make a little disclaimer saying that this theory will be controversial, this theory will, have you bring out your pitchforks. But that, I feel, is self-fulfilling prophecy. Think about it this way. Gregbot was problematic for many reasons we'll get into later, and it broke some of the trust a lot of theorists had in the quality of the video going forward. What you are doing here is going out of your way to predispose them to get angry at a theory that they haven't even given a chance yet. As much as I don't like to admit it, I'm speaking from experience here. In many of your recent videos, I instinctively left a dislike and then change into a like if the theory has any merit, whenever you say that it will be controversial, because the moment you're saying your current theory will have the same reception as Gregbot, you're also saying that you'll be making the same mistakes and leaps in logic as in Gregbot. No. I feel the more effective disclaimer is another one that you've done at least twice before in your FNaF theories, and to a certain extent that you've done in all of your videos, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get to that disclaimer when the time is right. So please bear with me until then.
Matt's theorizing has gone downhill at this point. His latest FNaF theories are lazy, proper research is not being done. He's clearly running out of material. I'm genuinely wondering if he's even passionate about this franchise anymore. There is a difference between telling theories and straight up telling misinformation. harsh, right?
Apart from the he's getting lazy and the one about you losing your passion for the franchise, almost every single one of these things that are highlighted in those Reddit threads is something that I may or may not have said in the past, but I'm sorry if they sound rude on the surface. Most of them are not intended to hurt or dehumanize you, but it's understandable that it would seem that way on the surface. The fact of the matter is that other than calling you lazy and questioning your passion for the franchise, so you know, the ad hominem arguments, these points are more of a plea for you to do better than they are about hating the theories themselves. The people that watch your videos and that write comments like these are fans, through and through. Not just FNaF fans, but especially game theory ones. These fans were here for the science videos, they saw the evolution, they stuck around until today. By the way, please bring back the science videos. My favorite video in this channel was about Cuphead and the prohibition, and that form of edutainment is something very few other channels were able to capture, as opposed to the deep dives in lore. Anyway, for instance, this script was originally a comic that took 3 hours to write, and then my computer crashed. I decided to redo it as a video instead, and it took 5 to 6 hours to write the 5,005 words in this script. So yeah, no one takes 3 hours of their time writing an essay on how wrong you are if they weren't dedicated fans. Or me. I'm a dedicated fan. But I'm also a sucker for getting a discussion going, so if it takes writing a book in the comment section, tell my professors I can't attend the exams, please. Thank you. Jokes aside, these people are passionate about your work, but there's also another factor. You're influential, obviously. Any newcomers to the franchise will watch your theories, take them at face value, and assume that that's the actual lore of the games instead of just a hypothesis. They know that there's a lot of lore to get into, and they aren't going to go check what is ambiguous and what isn't. FNaF is the new Kingdom Hearts. There's so much story that anyone that values their time is not going to go through it, and instead they will tend to gravitate to theories and explanations from people that may or may not be right about what it is that they are saying. In that sense, in order to not have newcomers become alienated whenever your theories contradict evidence are inevitably proving wrong, some of us theorists feel that we must warn the newcomers that your theories are not only fallible, but also just straight up contradictory at times. And of course, this also turns into frustration, and that is where those hate comments come from. But there's also a third side of the coin. The series creator, Scott Cawthon, and to a certain extent, other game creators. You've covered part of this in your Are Theories Killing Video Games video, but the influence that theorists, more specifically you, have on the plotline of video games that you cover on Game Theory is undeniable. Scott eventually confirmed in an interview with Daco that you were right when you said that the contents of the FNaF 4 box changed with time as the story he wanted to tell shifted focus. He's also stated multiple times that he tends to leave clues in the games to clarify things depending on prominent theories at any given time. You like to joke about your little rivalry with Scott, but there is some truth to it. He is listening, and he will change or add things to prove you right or wrong. Now, this doesn't mean he changes the story according to theories, but he does change the story according to theories. Of course, I'm talking about the elephant in the room. The company that contacted you saying that you were spot on and then changed the game story in a rush was confirmed by you on GT Live to be Steelball, and by proxy, Scott. In that sense, the fear that mistakes you make might lead to mistakes in the story is a very real fear among certain circles of theorists in the community. Now, I'm not blaming you for anything or saying that you should change your approach to theory crafting. You should totally change your approach to theory crafting, and I have some suggestions for later. But what I am trying to explain with this section is that the perspectives, the fears, the insecurities behind the hate comments are these. This is why you get the hate that you do. It's not about the theories themselves, even though when you jump the shark, you really jump the shark. Now, there is nothing that can be done about game theory's influence. Even if there was, the livelihood of the entirety of Team Theorists would be on the line, and if it takes some bad theories to keep you guys well fed, push out all the bad theories you want! If Scott and the other directors want to change the story to fit or disprove theories, that's their mistake. But it's also important to analyze these emotions because they are a side of the story that not only did you not explore in your video, but also that I feel is the main reason why people hold you more accountable than other FNaF theories. Like, sure, the other theorists you mentioned get their fair share of hate comments. Welcome to YouTube. Guess what? That's how it works. But none of them receive the same scrutiny as you. Unless you're John. I'm sorry, John. We'll get to you later, though, because you are a very special case that Matt also noted in his video later on. Anyway, back to Matt. But since we're talking about other theorists here on YouTube, the creators you featured here are all incredible, and you have no idea how happy I am to see them getting the recognition by the OGs like you. Speaking of, for everyone that doesn't know, these are from left to right: FNaF, Rytoast, ID's Fantasy, Hyperdroid, Ozone, Demuted, Not Real Name Not At All, and Impulse737. I'm just kinda let down that you didn't mention Sire Squawks, one of my favorites of this new era of Theorist channels, but hey, links in the description for every single one of them if you want to go check them out.
But the main thing is that this is nothing new. When I suggested Dream Theory as the explanation for the first wave of games back in 2015, people were so mad. They hated it, because honestly, I was dismissing 4 games of story and beloved characters with the whole, oh, it was all just a dream trope. Honestly, I didn't love it either, but it felt like where the evidence was largely pointing at the time. And yet, it's only now, all these years later, that the sentiment has finally changed on that theory, and people largely agree that Dream Theory was right at the time. The long and short of it is that sometimes the craziest theories in the moment become the correct theories a year, or 2 years, or even 5 years down the line as more details solidify around the story. For a great example of this, let's just take a look at everyone's favorite Gregory as a robot theory, where I propose that Gregory is indeed the robotic reincarnation of the crying child.
Now, what you say the reason for the hate might be is how you seemingly jump the shark and reach conclusions that may not seem probable, but that eventually are proven right, or are widely accepted as being the right answer for the time when it was published in. I'll be honest, I loved the original Dream Theory video back then, and I wasn't integrated in the English-speaking community to perceive the hate. So it always felt like things added up, despite the holes that you pointed out in the follow-up video. However, I do not think that theories like Gregbot or whoops, all Elizabeth can be compared to Dream Theory. Dream Theory is something that we commonly agree to have been the original intent. Because, point number 1, FNaF 4 was heavily implied to be a dream by the crying child. Point number 2, Scott made a big deal about Chica's plastic toy not having a beak, and there being a reason behind that, when the only toy Chica we knew only appeared in FNaF 2 and not FNaF 4. Point number 3, that coupled with the other cryptic messages like, what is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the minds of a child, and other things that reference what would later in the timeline become genuine killing methods, makes it hard not to reach the conclusion that FNaF 2, 1, and by proxy 3 were all a dream, as well as FNaF 4. Gregbot, however, the connections are thematic at best and contradictory at worst. I'll let you present your own points.
I mean, look at the facts, and for the sake of clarity and for the sake of your screenshots, I'll try to keep it all on a singular page since I know that you all love to boil my theories down to one image. So, how else, my friends, would you explain that Gregory looks like the crying child, that he is colored in purple which connects him to the Afton family, that he's taken a bite out of a golden Freddy head ice cream cone just like the crying child got bit, that he's being called broken, which parallels the final line said to the crying child, his vision getting all staticky when Vanny skips past him in the Pizzaplex, and him looking differently when Freddy gets Roxy's eyes.
Oh, how else indeed? Let's go through each of these. White stripes in the shirt, with a bang of hair between the eyes. Other than that, there is nothing that connects these two in terms of appearance. Gregory and Crying Child's hairstyle is different. The color of the shirt is different. The type of shirt itself is different. Their eye color is different. If we try to look for other things they share in common, we'll not only find there is none, but that their behavior is a polar opposite. Crying Child is so scared that he hides from the animatronics and cries until the next day. Gregory, on the other hand, destroys them. Which is the most badass thing I've heard a kid do in a FNaF in a FNaF story before. If the appearance was similar enough to warrant merit, there would be more in common with Crying Child and the puppet than with Gregory, and we know Charlie is the puppet instead. Black cloth with white stripes, theme of crying and hiding. They're both kind and see the animatronics as their friends. Maybe this was a retcon, I don't know. It's not really relevant right now. What I'm trying to say is, in terms of appearance, we don't have similar appearance. Purple is never a color that is associated with Gregory. He's always depicted with a dark blue shirt, not a purple one, and definitely distinct from the bright violets that Purple Guy is associated with. The ice cream bite is the first one that could mean something if it had any evidence that proved something was afoot. Otherwise, it could be just a joke or irony, which Scott is no stranger to. Roll the clip.
Well, because I'm an angel.
You mean like from God?
Yes, like from God.
But what does God have to do with Christmas?
What?
You okay?
The lines that later became "I feel you are broken" and "No, I feel that something is wrong. I'm taking you to the first aid station" originally read as follows: "I am detecting blood. You are injured. Your arm is cut badly. I am taking you to the first aid station." Now, I hate using cut content as evidence, just as much as the next guy, probably even more than them, because something that is cut was not meant to be consumed in a way that a normal player could use to piece a story together. But in this case, I feel that's important because these changes are very clearly not an attempt to make the story different, but rather to tone down references to cuts and blood, to keep the game kid-friendly, like Stillwell advertises on Steam. This, coupled with the fact that Vanny's knife was also cut from the game, seems more like censorship than actual evidence. Still, if we somehow assume that the references to blood were changed for a story-related purpose, and we can prove that, we cannot prove that, then yes, this is actually pretty good evidence toward Gregbot. The reason you presented for the static inference was that Vanny was using illusion discs that should tamper with cameras. And this makes absolute sense. In the twisted ones, these illusion discs do have an effect on robots, but not in the way that you'd expect. They aren't depicted to cause static in cameras, but they are used multiple times in the last arc to completely mask their wearer's presence. This means you can become invisible to animatronics despite being completely visible to humans, which is something we can clearly see in the fountain scene. Freddy could not see Vanny, but Gregory easily could. This actively contradicts the notion that Gregory could be a robot kid. How do I explain the static? Well, in lore, we've seen that the illusion discs can be disorientating, especially if you can still hear very high frequencies like a human child could. How do you show this disorientation without having to make drastic changes to your game? Well, quite simply, apply a filter that distorts and blocks out things in the screen. How do you write dialogue for a scene after Freddy receives an update? Quite simply, you will make reference to what was changed. Chica's voice box can stun animatronics, Monty's claws can slash through locks, and Roxy's eyes can see rings through walls. He can also see Vanny, even when she's normally invisible to him. This means that the world probably looks different to him. Why focus on Gregory? Because he always focuses on Gregory. You've heard how many times he calls Gregory by name. And because that's who he is talking to, you know, when you are talking to someone and you want to say, oh, I can see things different, you will usually point out how you can see that person different, or at least, you know, that's how I would, you know, comment on that. Basically, everything that was used to prove Gregbot back in the day was either actively contradicting Gregbot or explainable by simpler reasons. And you know the Occam's razor. If you viewers do not know what the Occam's razor is, it is that the simplest solution is generally almost always the best. In that sense, unless we really want to come up with something new for the sake of coming up with something new, a theorist's instinct should be, is there a simpler solution, before going, what does this affect? Now, I do not blame you for forgetting the properties of the illusion discs. Heck, at least Remnant has a theme from which you can derive its properties. But this is what people mean when they say that you're relying on don't do enough research. Things that you use as a basis for your theories sometimes have a property that actively contradicts the idea you want to explore. And of course, people will hold you to a higher standard because you are the MatPat from the game theory. Now, just because 4 out of 6 of your bases are easily explained with alternatives, one actively contradicts your conclusion, and the other has much more of a chance of being irony than it is than, you know, actually holding a theme, that doesn't mean that your conclusion is wrong. Fallacies often lead to wrong conclusions, but we can't completely discard a conclusion just because it's based on a fallacy. That's called a fallacy for anyone not in the know. Like, if I say that, oh, water is transparent because the moon is made of cheese, and the moon is not made of cheese, that does not mean that water isn't transparent. It just means that I have made a leap in logic. I reached the right conclusion with the wrong evidence. That is, you know, my mistake, but if you assume that my conclusion is wrong just because my logic was wrong, you are committing a fallacy as well. So, in that sense, let's see why you're comparing Gregbot to Dream Theory.
And just like with Dream Theory and Book Theory, more evidence for this has just started to stack up. Since the release of Security Breach, the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, which many are now considering to be 100% canon to the games, these books have repeatedly included over and over again story after story of kids either becoming robots, always being robots, or being taken over by robots.
First, I'd like to point out that a recurring theme is not nearly enough to warrant a theory. We've had themes of bad people getting bad things in Fazbear Frights, but that doesn't mean that they are meant to parallel or set up anything in the games. They're just a trope of horror stories because we hope for justice and fear divine retribution for our bad actions, especially retribution through means we don't understand. The theme of an imposter is also recurrent, not just in FNaF, but in most horror stories. That is because it puts us in a situation where we cannot trust who we thought we could, because that person might not be who we think it is. That and the fear of someone living your life instead of you, especially when that punishment comes as a form of divine retribution, is a recurring theme that makes sense because it's a horror story trope. However, this theme does set up the mimic plot twist in Ruin, a robot pretending to be a child. This can be used to argue against Gregbot, though, because the theme was a robot pretending to be a child and not a robot pretending to be a robot pretending to be a child, but I digress.
Another one of those stories, this time GGY, it focuses on a boy named Gregory, sounds familiar, who sets high scores in the Pizzaplex, again, should sound familiar. He disappears multiple school counselors, similar, and he goes by the name Dr. Rabbit. Plus, you can't ignore the fact that he's calling himself Dr. Rabbit, which again is yet another connection over to the Afton family. And while it doesn't ever explicitly say that Gregory is a robot, it does write him with some very oddly robotic characteristics. Quote from here, "Greg returned the wave. He smiled. Then he cocked his head and studied Tony for several seconds." It's weird, right? It's written in a very specific way. It's an odd detail that signaled my theorist senses, and honestly, it feels to me like he's written like an AI, stopping to learn, study human behavior.
Dr. Rabbit seems to be an obvious reference to William Afton. Someone that Gregory should not know unless he saw him. Now, the robotic movements that you mentioned are something particularly interesting because up until now, robot humans were always too human to seem robotic to most people, and that's where the twist comes from. Charlie is the greatest example. Not even she knew that she was a robot until it had to be explained to her by her other robot self. No, these movements feel a lot more like glitch traps. The waving, the cocking of the head, the studying of the person in front of them. The hacker handle, Dr. Rabbit, also feels a lot more like either Afton or someone pretending to be Afton. And yeah, this definitely feels like AI learning how to interact, but if we assume glitch trap to be the mimic AI, all we have to do to prove that this is glitch trap acting through Gregory is to prove that Gregory was at some point connected with the VR game in which glitch trap could hypnotize and swap bodies with his victims, which we've seen happen to humans like Jeremy and Vanessa. Unless they're both robots, why not? This connection is easy to argue for by assuming him to be Patient 46 because Patient 46's therapists are contracted by Fazbear Entertainment.
To grow and operate. And that sort of AI connection actually returns when we go back to Security Breach. Here, I'd like to direct your attention to the wall code from the secret sister location room found near the end of that game. It wasn't until a year later, when this book finally came out again, this is the same one with GGY, but this time it had a tale called The Storyteller. This one is a tale all about a genius roboticist who speaks to his AI creations in a very specific way. Quote again from this book, "Every sheet of paper was covered with odd stick drawings and strange symbols that were not at all familiar to Mr. Burroughs. Squiggles, squares, loops, triangles within triangles. The code is the language of the mimic. The mimic being an AI program designed to copy those it watched."
The wall code seems to point to that AI connection that you made. I don't know, I don't have any explanations that are more probable, but there's the possibility that Gregory, being a good hacker, would be able to crack the code when no one else could. Again, this is less probable than it being a reference to the AI language in the Tales books, but it's a possibility and I feel it's important to put out there.
Oh yeah, and don't forget the fact that we also discovered that Robot Kid heads were found down in the sister location bunker, showing that Afton was working on Robot Kid projects way sooner than any of us ever expected. That should actually be on there too.
A little side note about these heads in this location, they are very reminiscent of the ones Charlie makes in the Twisted One. They can also only talk to you in the presence of an illusion disc. Just thought I'd point out what Scott was planning to drop on us when this was established, because sometimes that context explains the significance of the clues we use. Doesn't contradict your AI connection, it's just new information that I felt was important.
And even if Gregory isn't a robot, it feels pretty darn clear that someone in this franchise probably is at this point.
Yeah, someone is most likely a robot, but as we've seen, probably not Gregory. Maybe this is only setting up the mimic and nothing else, but who knows? That's not the point of this ramble, now is it?
I am here having fun in my little corner of the internet trying to solve silly video game mysteries with a cool team around me and an awesome community of theorists.
This is something I can empathize with at the most basic level. And I hope that everyone else that makes or used to make theories can too. Doesn't matter if we're right or wrong, all that matters is that back and forth, the discussion, the debate to a certain extent. Every time I have a talk with a FNaF theorist, I almost feel like I'm playing Ace Attorney all over again, just because we're both doing our best to see the flaws in the other's argument and fixing our own. This is what debates are for, having fun and correcting mistakes. And if, you reviewer, you're convinced that there is any other reason for it, you have priorities to reconsider. You're wrong. However, Matt, I'm going back to addressing you now. While it's true that forgetting evidence that contradicts your theories is a common occurrence, and, you know, you should not be prosecuted for it, I cannot, in good faith, condemn people that think the evidence being forgotten might have been left out for the sake of not poking holes in an otherwise solid theory. They may be close-minded, but not taking the holes they present into consideration can come off as either a theory that wasn't well planned at best, and malicious intent to sway people who don't know any better at worst. I'm not accusing you of either of those, please note that. I'm just explaining why they feel and say those things, even if their harshness is unwarranted. Speaking of holes in theories though, I feel this is a very important thing to talk about when it comes to making the community come together and do something beautiful. I don't know if this might just be my bias, but have you noticed that the theories where you're not confident are the ones that received the least controversy? You knew that Dream Theory had holes, but you only acknowledged and addressed those holes in the follow-up video, and that was pretty well received, I'd say. Same goes for the one where you asked for help in solving the name in the survival logbook. There wasn't hate that you wouldn't expect from a normal YouTube video, but you stepped down from the persona that many people see you with as the guy that knows all the lore and became one of us. Someone that can see that there is something going on and points it out in hopes that someone else might have an idea that you didn't think about. In the case of videos where you openly admit that there are holes, you're opening the door for discussion and debate, and acknowledging that your theories aren't without flaw. Now, sure, the door is always open for discussion on Reddit, on the Discord, and on YouTube, but just like the "you will hate this theory" disclaimers make the viewer feel on edge, the disclaimer where you say, "This has some holes, but this is the direction I think makes most sense," makes the viewer see you in a more humble light, and by proxy, debate in a more open-minded light. And sure, the show's motto, "This is just a theory, a game theory," is a disclaimer that everything you present in an episode is most likely flawed. But it's a phrase that you've repeated so many times over the years that people forget it had a meaning in the first place. So, if you're going to take anything from this video, please let it be this. Go out of your way to see what could counter your theory and admit at the beginning of the video that it has flaws. It has a better effect than saying a given theory will start World War III at least.
While we're being honest about all this, let's also be honest about our standards for clue hunting.
Now, I'm not gonna play this part of the video, because I have nothing of substance to add up until you talk about the MBTI. This is just a really good double standard that you pointed out and that I wish more people had noticed. Again, if you viewers at home are confused and haven't watched the original video, link is in the description. You can always come back later.
A few weeks ago, I asked a bunch of you online to take the Myers-Briggs personality test.
Now, in this section, you introduce something that kind of makes me uncomfortable. Seeing a science communicator like you evaluate data taken from a test that is widely regarded as pseudoscience doesn't sit well with me. Still, assuming that your conclusions have no merit just because you used a very, very questionable method would be committing the fallacy. The conclusions you reach here are interesting because I felt this pattern too between my own theories. Sometimes I choose to only use what I know to build a solid foundation, and sometimes I choose to go wild with an idea and extrapolate with what that would mean. I have found that an S mentality is more useful for theory crafting, both when you're making a timeline, but also when you're establishing a setting. What do we know about Remnant? What do we know about Michael Afton? And then the N mentality is more useful to extrapolate what is and isn't feasible to happen. Knowing that Remnant has this and that property, we can conclude that Michael can or cannot do this or that thing, even if it wasn't shown to us directly. Now, about John, I told you would get back to him. John's original theories were inventive and arrived at conclusions you wouldn't expect. Some real out-of-the-box thinking, but that was still very much grounded and makes sense. His catchphrase, "Need more proof," actually meant presenting proof, not circumstantial evidence, but actual evidence that points to only one possibility. With time, however, as he started to exchange more and more ideas with you and other unaligned people, so to speak, his catchphrase started to refer more and more to things that support the theory but that don't prove it. It adds weight to the theory if its conclusion is true, but it's easily explainable with other factors and thus is only circumstantial. You attributed this change in his theories to a change in his personality. I personally like to think that of S as deductive reasoning and N's as inductive reasoning. But I'll use S and N for the rest of the section for the sake of simplicity. Here's my suggestion for making better, more satisfying theories for everyone. Have both N and S's working on FNaF at Team Theorist. If the N starts to extrapolate things beyond what's reasonable, especially if evidence contradicts it, the S should keep them in check. If the S's foundation isn't breaking new ground, have the N spice things up. These two working together are always sure to come to a better and more interesting theory than each working separately. Oh, by the way, if you want to contract an S, I feel that's generally the way I construct arguments, and I could sure go for a part-time, so think about it, okay? Wink wink, nudge nudge. Anyway, on with the video.
I have seen people online picking and choosing certain stories to be canon and certain stories to not be canon. And again, I have to call out, isn't that just picking and choosing certain evidence pieces to forward your intended narrative?
People picking and choosing stories to be and not be canon would be considered cherry picking if it weren't for the Fazbear Frights quote, "From different corners of the FNaF's canon." While this isn't necessarily the only interpretation for this quote, it implies that some stories are canon to the games and that some are not, but it's unclear which is which. That left many theorists to pick up the pieces and feel that they had to categorize which ones were and weren't canon. In this sense, this picking and choosing isn't cherry picking, it's just misinterpreting. I think. I've trained myself to always assume everyone does everything in good faith until proven otherwise, so I might be biased. But
In the end, here's the important thing to remember. We're all on the same team. We're all working towards the same goal. We are trying to solve this franchise together as completely as possible using the most satisfying evidence-based answers we can.
That we are. We are theorists. We make up funny stories to explain funny events in our funny murder games, and we'll debate until one of us has to go to sleep, because time zones are time zones. That's what we stand for. That's why we love it so much. And in that sense, thank you for your service, MatPat. Before you go though, let's just summarize the things I think you can benefit from keeping in mind. I'll keep this screenshotable so that people can clown on me for a month or two. That's how divine retribution works, right? A disclaimer that lets people know you're willing to be wrong is always more useful and uniting than one that teases a divide. Some people you might perceive as haters are actually just your fans, and their criticism usually comes from the heart. Get someone to disagree with you as fast as possible so that you know what counters people might use. Check your theories for fallacies, this is very important. Make a foundation of what you know for sure before extrapolating. Make sure to get that reviewed by an S, or the equivalent of a reputable metric that isn't pseudoscience. And don't forget to be awesome. You already are. And with that, I just want to say, this is all just a theory. Oh wait, that's trademarked. Fine. This has been JK. Thank you for being awesome. And I'll see you next time. Chill out.